postponed. A lot of customers are holding off on spending additional money, especially on luxury items, and just in general, limiting the human-to-human contact as much as possible. And so the big question really is, what can you do as a business owner during this time that will keep your brand healthy and strong, and how can you continue the value of the relationships that you've built over time during this time right now? And so being in this pandemic, or in this crisis, lots of times we're inclined to rely on our instincts, on our gut feeling every now and then. But what I really want to stress here is that it is important to also look at some fresh data and accurate insights. And they really have been more important now in recent months. And so I'm assuming that at this point, you've probably connected with your consumers and you're understanding what space they are currently in, what they are in need of, what challenges they're facing, what are their pain points really. And so that is, I think, one thing that I really want to stress is that even though it's important to recognize the uncertainties that we are all facing during this time, and of course also fears surrounding COVID and whatnot, don't let this crisis paralyze you, or your business relationships. So really continue to enable your team to really understand your customers and also act based on timely insights. And I think that is really key to navigating your way through this crisis, both for you and also from a marketing perspective. So when all of this first started a few months ago, we of course had our marketing schedule in place, even though it would have been easy to just execute as planned and go ahead with whatever it is that we had planned, it didn't feel like the right thing to do. And the reason being is that the consumer landscape really changed overnight. So suddenly we found that consumers had completely different needs, especially as it relates to small businesses. Working with a lot of small to medium-sized businesses, their priorities were suddenly trying to survive. It wasn't any longer trying to push our marketing plan out or figuring out what the social media campaign looks like. And so in talking with some of our current clients and figuring out their challenges and their pain points, we realized quickly that we had to make a change in how we serve them. And this, I think, is really applicable to a lot of other small businesses, medium-sized businesses, really any business, but especially for a small business one. What we ended up doing is, for example, figuring out how to make use of one-on-one sessions to really understand where are they currently finding themselves, how can we maybe adjust some of the services that we offer in order to better help them and provide tips on how to continue being present during this time. So let's take a quick look at what we are going to cover today. I do want to talk a little bit about continuing to grow and building your relationships with social media. So of course now, social media is really important because a lot of us are spending time at home and on our phones, figuring out lots of different technology mediums that we can utilize. So definitely want to dive into that. I do want to talk a little bit about being agile and purposeful. What does that look like during a time like this? And what does that really mean for your business? And last but not least, I do want to also touch on revisiting your overall business strategy as well as your diversity efforts. So continuing to grow with social media, I think, is really important, and a lot of this is probably a no-brainer, right? I mean, all of us are spending more time at home. People, whether they're working or whether they're spending time off with their children or their families, there are more eyeballs on your marketing efforts, especially on your social media. When all of this first started a few months ago, we saw that there was a lot of there were a lot of opinions going around online about companies offering their services and their products during such a sensitive time. And initially, I agreed with a lot of that. And, it was really more important to maybe push your brand purpose in the forefront and your core values and focus on that messaging to really create that connection with consumers in a more emotional way, right? Instead of continuing to aggressively sell your products. However, I think now that we've been in this for a few months, I think that that's probably changed a little bit because, one, as a small business, we all know that it's difficult to survive if you're not doing that, right? And so it's hard to just kind of put your business aside and say, okay, well, I'm just going to communicate and do this and not focus on anything sales related. I think what makes more sense at this point is figuring out a way to meet your client or your consumer, or even potential consumers, where they are at. Meaning, what is it that I've been offering and what are they currently experiencing? And how can I bring those two things together in a way where I can provide value with my company and my services, right? And so I think continuing your digital marketing efforts is definitely a part of that, and it's extremely advantageous, again, for two reasons here. One, like I already shared, we're spending a lot more time at home. There's more time being spent on the computer, whether you're working or just for personal needs, whatever it may be. And two, when the dust settles eventually, everyone's going to be screaming for attention. And so being a consistent voice in the market now, I think will really give you the advantage over everyone else that is going to try and re-enter the market post-COVID-19, because you were there all along. So I think it's only to your benefit to try and figure out the best way possible for you to continue to have that presence. So one thing that you can do, and I know I said, don't push aggressively for sales. However, I think doing this in a smart way where you can pivot your business to online sales in a very strategic way. So again, some people are tight on money right now. Everybody's kind of dealing with a different situation that they're in. Lots of times people say we're all in the same boat. The reality is we are not. I mean, everybody is dealing with a different challenge, whether it's work related, whether it's a challenge with their kids and trying to school them, whatever it may be. I think everybody has a different challenge that we need to acknowledge. Once that's done, there's really no need for a brand to not continue working on their authority and their awareness. So continuing to create that exposure. And I think if you have a product or service that makes sense during this time, finding a creative way to share that with your current following, I think that in and of itself really replaces an aggressive sales push and only helps you in the long run. So it's all about creating value and understanding how you were creating value pre-COVID and how you can create value during COVID, I think will really help you excel during this time. Another thing here is double checking your messaging and your tone. So, are you speaking to your audience in a more empathetic way and also with more sincerity? Again, we're all going through this together, but everybody has different challenges that they are currently facing. So how can your product or your service or even just content that you are sharing with your customers, how can that improve your customer's life during COVID-19, right? And so if you have, for us, for example, we're a consultancy, and so we're really trying to help people get from point A to point B. And so if somebody right now, diversity and inclusion is a huge, it's a huge thing for companies, and everybody's kind of trying to figure out how to tap more into that. What does their diversity strategy look like? And so we're really able to position that in a way where we can help small to medium-sized or even corporate businesses with all of that at the table. But also you want to think about your content or engagement strategies. How has that changed? What type of information are you sharing? I think because there are more eyeballs on your business now, more on your marketing, it's really important to reassess and evaluate what content you are pushing out. And more importantly, ask yourself, is this content relevant? Why should anybody care? Why am I sharing this? Is this going to make their life better? Are they able to take this and apply it to a situation where they can benefit from, right? And so in order to do all of that, I really also urge you to, to also grow your social media, especially. I urge you to go back to your values and your pillars that actually define your business. So they're not just values that you create and that, you know, you put on your website and you put them on your office wall and it's all good and it's all said and done. If you remember early on when I was talking a little bit more about what we do, I was mentioning our core values of authenticity, culture, and diversity. And so try to understand where your pillars are and how you can connect that to the communication and to the content that you are pushing out. How is that helpful for the audience during this time? Actually read that during crisis, many times businesses and brands go back to understanding what their core values or their pillars are like. What do they mean? There's a lot of importance to connecting your brand and business with purpose, right? And so that is especially important during crisis. Think about that a little bit more. You know, some companies I know they may be established and they may not necessarily have a core set of values or pillars that they've identified necessarily. And I think that's okay. I think you can always go back to the drawing board, and this is probably the perfect time to go back and understand, what does that look like for us? What does that mean? And how can we do that in a very genuine way? It's really important because nobody wants to feel like you're doing something just to check a box. And again, with us being in the work of, you know, doing a lot of diversity work, lots of times you see companies just checking off the box to be able to say, yes, we hire this many people and we're a diverse company, but diversity looks at a lot more factors than just gender and race, which are the typical factors that we associate with diversity. But also, you know, looking at other factors like equity and inclusion and whatever else your values may be, they certainly don't need to be tied to that. I'm just giving that as an example because for us, that's kind of where we stand. And so maybe that can be related to one of your pillars as we're going through all of this. And then also really taking the time to enhance your current website, to update your current website. Look at some opportunities where maybe you can host webinars, right? I mean, we're doing one right now as we speak, but those are definitely opportunities that a lot of businesses I've seen have tapped into because everything is becoming more virtual. So understanding how can you not only grow with social media, but also continue to develop new business relationships by doing sessions like this where you're able to share value with a potential consumer base. So there are different tools out there. You have Microsoft Teams, you have Zoom, and I think just taking a look at that and understanding where you fit in with your brand and your business and what you're offering could be really valuable for the long run. I also think in general, it is helpful to take a look at where you stand with just your business overall. I know sometimes, or a lot of times, small businesses get tied up with working in their business all the time, meaning they are working with their clients and their consumers, and they barely have time to work on their business. So really continuing to develop your own business, continuing to develop your following, growing your social media, making sure that your website is always up to date as consumers are coming back to perhaps check for a new blog or new content that you share. Mark, if we have any questions right now in the audience, I'd be happy to answer some of those before I move to the second part.
And feel free to drop the questions in the chat room if there are questions.
Yeah, so I generally like for those sessions to be really interactive and engaging. So feel free to share. You don't have to hold off until the end. So just let us know if you have any questions. All right, well, part 2 here is really focused on being agile and purposeful by building a pandemic-proof brand. And so, this pandemic, of course, has affected a lot of consumer mindsets. It's affected a lot of perceptions. And there was actually a recent Nielsen study done, which surveyed people across multiple nations that were affected by COVID-19. And they surveyed them or by people that were affected by COVID-19 before and during the lockdown. And they found out that consumers are feeling a lot more empathetic and a lot more altruistic than they were pre-lockdown. And so to assess the consumer mindsets, respondents were shown a selection of images that depict various degrees of agreeableness. And so the study found that compared with pre-lockdown, consumer perceptions are now leaning more towards being open, being trusting, and really approaching the world more with open arms. And so the question you should ask yourself is, do you have a brand that people trust? Do you have a brand that is purposeful? And so when we speak about agility and purpose today, in terms of agility, I really want to, agility can be a lot of different things. What we want to focus on today is, are you agile enough? Do you have the ability of being able to quickly adjust to market conditions as they're changing? And so the term disruptions has come up a lot over the past few months. It's really become the norm during COVID-19. And while agility can relate to a lot of different things like the culture, the team management, operations, all of those things, we're really just looking at it from the perspective of, are you able to quickly adjust to the evolving market right now? And that is important because you want to continue to nurture your customer relationships, right? Again, at the end of the day, it's all about how are you able as a small business to develop value to your customer base. And if you're understanding where your customer currently stands, what they're looking for, you're really able to nurture that consumer relationship in a much better way. And it also allows you to attract a new consumer base with
Lydia?
You froze.
that in mind.
There you
So
go.
a lot of these stands for with
We lost you for a second, Lydia. So I think you're back. You're fine now.
say it again, Mark.
We lost you. You froze up for a few seconds here, but you're back. Go right ahead. Okay.
Okay. So let me just repeat the last few lines here I shared. So, consumers really want to be aligned with a brand that stands for something. And I think we've seen a lot of that over the past few months with brands taking stand for a social cause or anything that's really happened in the cultural landscape. I don't want to get into the details of that during this presentation, but I think consistent emotional connections with consumers are really at the heart of what modern brands do. So consumers want to connect with brands that have a purpose and that have meaning. They want to be inspired. But, a lot of times we've also read how purpose can be overrated, especially for the younger generation or the millennial or the Gen Z generation that a lot of times is referred to. And sometimes I think companies try too hard to be purposeful. It almost can seem like an ad gimmick, similar to checking off the box with diversity, for example. Again, the key here is you want to be genuine and you want to be authentic. And it really needs to resonate with people. And that's what drives consumer decisions. And that is eventually what drives sales. Patagonia is actually a pretty good example of a company that not only during COVID have they been able to raise awareness about social injustice and racial injustice to be able to get involved more, but they've also stated that you can't really reverse your purpose into your purpose through marketing necessarily. And so, being able to be true to yourself as a brand and to your values, I think that really has for them they've staked their entire reputation on being a brand that lives in its purpose. And so that's definitely a company that you can take a look at for a little bit of inspiration and seeing how they've been doing things a little differently.
Lydia, and just to jump in with another question, there's a couple in the chat room that I posted, but I want to make sure we address those. So what brand, again, are there other brands that are doing relatively well during the pandemic where you're communicating that level of trust, during these difficult times, or someone who may not be doing well? I mean, give us the example of another organization, whether it's locally in Detroit or across the country, that you think has done a nice job of really adjusting, whether it's going from brick and mortar online. But give us the example of a brand that you think is still doing well during these difficult times in terms of building that customer trust and keeping it front and center.
I think if with us being in Detroit, of course, the auto industry, I think is an important one to take a look at, whether it's GM or Ford. A lot of the automotive companies or even suppliers that have adjusted their offering, right, their services with going and helping with the PPE, whether it's developing masks, hand sanitizers, all of that. I think that's been a really great example of how they've been able to pivot during this time. But also, I think it was Ford that stopped some of their advertising for some of their cars during that time and really focused on building those connections with the consumer, whether that was through social media or other initiatives and campaigns that they had in place to actually go back and really understand, how are people currently being affected? I mean, the last thing people are probably thinking about during the pandemic is buying a car, right? And we've seen, we hosted one of our virtual sessions about a couple of months ago that was focused on multicultural auto buying during COVID-19. And we heard from a lot of our experts that it's not, there's still interest in buying a car. That hasn't really disappeared, but I think it's more so focused on how can you continue to build with your consumer right now and understanding what they are looking for versus pushing sales aggressively.
Okay. And then also you talk about agility. What about some businesses that during the pandemic have pivoted, if you will, balancing the brick and mortar versus the online services that they currently offer? Obviously that affects your brand, the agility component. Any examples of businesses that were maybe more traditional and then have pivoted to the online space? And the other part of that question is, how do you balance, if you're trying to consider going to the online space, how do you find that proper balance between brick and mortar and online as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think businesses that were kind of in both the brick and mortar and e-commerce, they definitely had a much easier transition. And you saw a lot of that as stores were getting shut down. So to give you an example, Ulta Beauty, it's beauty stores across the country. They've, of course, have had e-commerce in place too, but they've had to shut down all of their stores, but they were able to just really pivot through their e-commerce specifically. I don't know that I have an example of a company that wasn't in e-commerce at all and has kind of shifted into that space. I don't have an exact example, but I'm sure that has happened as well. Again, the transition is a lot easier when you're already prepared to be in kind of both environments and for that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Part 3 here that I want to focus on today is revisiting your strategy and also your diversity efforts. So as a reminder, earlier this year, there were several marketing strategies and toolkits that were introduced to the market that focused on indicating that customers expect a business to be more socially responsible by acknowledging the current issue and acting on it. And I think we've seen a lot of that right now. And so when doing so as a business, you don't necessarily have to sacrifice your entire business and marketing plans. Again, a few months ago, people had their marketing strategy, their plans set for the rest of the year, at least for the next few quarters, and they really had to go back and figure out, we can't say this, how do we communicate to be more sensitive, to be more empathetic with our consumer base, and really connecting in a lot better, I guess, just to connect better overall. And look at the businesses still receiving support from their communities. Those are the ones that really have made it a point to connect with their consumers based on where they are and meeting them where they are. And these businesses have a really strong brand presence and a lot of brand advocates because they've been able to accurately address the issue at hand and also be able to pivot in a way that not only makes sense for their business, but also for their customers. And a lot of times you see people and consumers choosing to support these brands during tough times because they have a strong connection with them already, and that is continuing to grow. So I wouldn't really underestimate the value of continuing to build those relationships during this time, because looking back in a couple of years, or even when we're just out of this pandemic, looking back at the brands that chose to make a difference, that chose to say the right words and take the right actions, I think is going to go a long way. And even if sales may not reflect that in the short term, they definitely will in the long run. And it's also another part of creating that brand love, creating that emotional brand connection that I also like to talk about. And so while we believe that you should always be working on your brand, if you haven't done so already, I think it's a great time to be able to do that before the dust settles here. Brands should really turn away from some of the tasteless sales messaging and instead really embrace the opportunity for brand building. And in order to build and preserve that trust with your consumers, it's imperative that you look at all of your different marketing initiatives, all of your consumer touch points. So not just what are we doing online, which is where, that's obviously the most connection that consumers have right now, but the shutdown, has been removed. So, stores are opening back up, people are going back out. And so how are you addressing the current situation in a different way? What did it look like pre-COVID? What does it look like during COVID? And are you already thinking about post-COVID? And that's where, I really want to highlight to examine the tone and the voice and really cut out anything that is not remotely, anything that is not sensitive to our current landscape. And I think right now it's really important to be able to have that communication and have that open communication. So I know I've talked a lot about the brands and the businesses talking to their consumer base and making sure that their tone and their messaging is accurately set up. But do you also have a two-way communication street right now? Are you able to get feedback from your consumers to really understand how you can better position yourself during this time? That can include things like surveys, social media listening, where they're just sharing their feedback on social media, maybe the contact form on your website, a lot of different ways, email campaigns that you may have in place where they're able to respond to you and actually connect with a real person instead of everything being done through bots and whatnot. So I think that is really important to make sure that there's communication set up on both ways or through both ways. So, actions I think should really go beyond sending empathetic emails. With a lot of the recent campaigns and cultural things that were happening, you see that every brand, even if you hadn't heard from them in the past 5 to 6 years or so, suddenly they were all sending empathetic emails as it related to several movements in our community and nationally. And I think, being careful with that and really making sure that your actions go beyond just sending those empathetic emails is really important by adapting more tangible solutions. So you also saw, the change, I think, where businesses didn't any longer or no longer said only what they were about, but then now they were looking at the actions. So they started sharing their actions. What are we doing right now to really keep their business moving forward? What are we doing? How can we be a part of the change? How can we be there, do the right things so our customers can actually have what they need? And I think that's really important. Another part of reassessing your strategy is definitely reviewing your current service offerings as a business and understanding how can this possibly be extended. And this is something that we're also helping customers right now is, has COVID-19 presented opportunities for you to do business differently that will help strengthen your brand and offerings in a way where you're able to grow to that next level in your business. Another example, lots of businesses were hosting events in person. We saw that a lot of that had transitioned to the online space. Lots of webinars, lots of panels, lots of conferences that took place. And so really understanding how can we provide value in a different way to still reach that consumer base. Matter of fact, with those events, what ended up happening is, when you have an event in one local area, so we had our program actually planned to take place during the auto show, which was canceled because it was turned into a field hospital. And so that program for us transitioned online. It was an online panel discussion that we did. And we found that we were able to reach a much wider audience, which gave us as a company a lot more opportunities to tap into because we had people chime in from Japan, from Europe, and that would have been impossible had we had our event in person as planned. And so really think about what types of, not just events, but what types of opportunities have you been able to extract from the situation that can really help you take that business to the next level. And I think however you choose to continue your business strategy, it's really important to remember that one, again, you're authentic and you're purposeful or meaningful with your efforts in order to build that trust with your audience and grow that network. Last but not least, this is something I'd like to highlight, are your diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, both internally and externally, aligned with actions to support wherever your company currently stands. Really thinking about where are you today? Where do you want to be? What is your goal, whether it's short-term or long-term, and what actions in between do you have to take in order to achieve more inclusive goals? Of course, this is something I can talk about on and on. This is a whole separate presentation by itself to just talk about those DEI efforts. But I do want to encourage you to take a look at what does your company look like right now. And as a small business, I think it's not just about hiring people, right? It's not just about let's hire a bunch of people so we can call ourselves diverse. And even if you don't have any employees, if it's just you and maybe one partner, whatever it may be, think about what are we doing as a company to still embody that diversity? Are we supporting other brands that are diverse? Are we, how are you purchasing? How are you spending your money? Then also equity really refers to the fair and equal treatment, to the respect that you are paying people who are different than you, right? And so it's not just acknowledging our similarities, but also acknowledging our differences. And then inclusion, of course, lots of times we hear diversity is more about, diversity is more about our differences, the different factors that we embody. So whether it's gender, race, your occupation, your sexual orientation, your life experiences, or even where you grew up. I mean, diversity encompasses a lot of different factors, but receiving an invite to the table, receiving an invite to the dance, we always say is diversity, but being asked to dance, having that seat at the table, having a voice at the table, that is actually what inclusion is. And a lot of times we get that mixed up because we hear that diversity and inclusion is kind of comes as a pair. It's packaged up. You hear D&I a lot, and now as of recent, it's more, the focus is more on inclusion versus diversity. So it's kind of been switched to I&D, with that. But really focus on what does that look like for us? What can we do? Where do we want to be ideally as a company? And what are the actions that are required to get us there? Yeah. Any questions at all about the revisiting your strategy and your diversity efforts portion?
Yeah, one would be in the area of cause marketing. And, we're finding a lot of organizations are wanting to get engaged with a cause. So talk to, those viewing this as well about the importance of cause marketing. What are the appropriate steps to make a decision to determine which cause I should become engaged in? Is it consistent with my brand? Is it not consistent with my brand? Is it controversial versus non-controversial? Talk to us about the cause marketing and how does that impact your overall brand? And how do you make those decisions?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. And I think the cause marketing really connects with the purpose marketing that I was talking about a little bit, because at the end of the day, you do want to make sure that whatever cause you're supporting to have more social awareness, whatever the issue may be, it needs to make sense for your brand, because whenever it doesn't, it actually seems it seems less genuine and it seems less authentic. And that's where you're able to build trust. So the more authentic and the more genuine you are, the more you build that trust with the consumer. So you want to be careful that whatever cause you associate yourself with, that makes sense for your brand. The best way in deciding which cause to be a part of or support, whether that's through financial means or just, through content, whatever it may be, I think is going back to the drawing board going back to your core values and your pillars as a business. What do we stand for? Aside from the products and services that we offer, what do we embody as a brand? What characteristics do we have? What brand attributes do we make up? And so going back, for us, for example, a lot of that is culture and diversity, connecting with a lot of different multicultural groups, for instance. And so you as a brand and as a business, you have to figure out, what does that look like for us? One of our attributes may be, just in general, being more empathetic or being altruistic. And so what can that look like? How does that translate into actions for your company?
I have a question.
And that decision a lot of times yeah, go ahead.
Okay. And so the last question along that line, slightly different approaches with social media. The branding efforts on social media. Talk about some of the challenges in terms of how you should be using social media, and why you should be careful about what you post, and how that could adversely certainly impact your brand as well from a business standpoint.
So, social media at this point, there are so many different channels. So I think understanding what channels you are on and how you're communicating on each channel, because 9 times out of 10 businesses have different audience on each one of these social channels, right? And so if I'm on LinkedIn, my network is a lot more professional. There's different types of relationships than when I'm on Instagram or when I'm on Facebook. And so understanding what audiences do I actually cater to and talk to per channel will help you understand how you can communicate to them. What I always say, especially now, the cultural landscape, it's very sensitive. It's easy to offend people, even if you're not doing that intentionally, of course, but you want to make sure that every time you're putting out a message, especially as it relates to cultural sensitivity with your product or service, you want to make sure that it's sensitivity proof. I don't know if that's the right word, but you want to make sure that it will not offend anybody. And you do that by, again, you don't have to have a big team. Even if you don't have, a committee or a board or anybody internally that you can tap into, think about your external resources, whether it's family or a friend, whether it's industry colleagues that may have a little more experience in that space. Can you share your message with them maybe before you push it out? I mean, I've heard of a lot of small businesses do that with new blog content that they were pushing out, or they wanted to issue a statement on the Black Lives Matter movement and things like that. They wanted to do that, and it came from a very genuine space, but they didn't really have the know-how, because that wasn't really, that's not what they do. And they're not a PR department, and they don't have a PR department. And so they didn't really understand how they can push out that statement without getting any backlash, like making sure that it makes sense for everybody, and they didn't want to offend anybody. So again, sharing that information with some of your contacts, maybe even people of that cultural background. I think a lot of times they're really open to helping give feedback and just making sure that you're saying the right words, and that you have that cultural understanding that you can continue to develop by doing things like that. Any other questions?
Not at this point, no. Not in the chat room.
All right, so I'll go ahead and cover the second part here of revisiting your strategy and diversity efforts. So here's some of the things that you can do for your brand during this time. Again, I know I focused on updating your strategy, but right now we're all kind of adapting to the current economic climate. And so this means adjusting everything from our marketing strategy, our brand messaging, our campaigns that maybe applied to the situation before and now have kind of become obsolete or not as important or relevant. Now is really the time to make those necessary adjustments to your brand strategy and make sure that you maintain that relevance in your industry and also with your customer loyalty. One thing that's good is reassessing your brand positioning right now and really working on your positioning. So understanding, how does our brand or our business fit into the market right now? Are we able to innovate? Are we able to offer anything differently than, what we did before in order to kind of change with that positioning. I mean, maybe you've discovered that you're able to offer a completely new service that wasn't really in demand before, and now demand and supply has changed, right? And you're able to offer something completely new and kind of be innovative in that sense and also useful to your customer. I think rebranding also, if your brand identity doesn't match your current purpose. And I say this because, again, during crisis, a lot of companies and brands go back to identifying with their purpose and really focusing on their core values internally, and that affects their messaging and their marketing output. And so if now is a time that you've realized, well, our purpose is not really strong, or we really need to revisit our brand identity because we thought we stand for one thing, and that may have worked over the past 5 to 10 years. But now through this pandemic, we've actually come to realize that our brand identity no longer matches our purpose. It no longer matches with what we want to stand for and what we want to communicate through our products and our services. So I think now is a really good time to kind of go back to that space and understand how can we evolve from here. I mean, companies, businesses that don't evolve, they essentially die. So we're always changing with the times, right? And so that also goes back to being agile. Are we able to quickly adapt to the current environment that we're in? Does my brand make sense? And of course, updating or rebuilding your website. I can't tell you, especially at the start of this back in March and April, we had several sessions with one-on-one sessions with businesses, and in talking with them and understanding where their business currently stands, so many of them did not even have a website. So forget rebuilding a website. They didn't even have any online presence. And so as everything was being shut down, without social media, without a website, I mean, where are people connecting with you? Where are they finding you, right? So you were able to get those referrals and that business in person by going to events and doing networking and then those traditional means. And that is still good and it's still valuable. But how can you evolve to also have a presence online? Again, there are so many consumer touch points, and depending on who you're looking to reach, your audience may actually be online most of the time, right? And so if you don't have a presence, they can't find you. Again, it's really important to have a website. And if you do have one, understand the value that you are currently delivering through that. Are customers finding what they need? Are they able to connect with you? Do we need to maybe rebuild our website during this time? And this is kind of where it makes sense to take a look at not just your strategy and your content, but really the overall site. Do we have any questions before I go into our summary?
Nope, keep going. We're good. Any questions? Nothing in the chat room. I think you're doing a great job addressing other questions in advance.
Sounds good. All right, well, some of the key takeaways of the items that I covered today, again, it's really important to have insights during this time to understand how the consumer landscape has changed, and understanding what challenges and what pain points are my customers experiencing during this time, and how can I continue to be a part of that consumer journey, right? Whether it's, you can do, and it doesn't always need to be formal focus groups and surveys. It can be something informal that you do. So, and really cost effective, I want to highlight too. So whether that's one-on-one sessions, following up in an email, having a phone conversations, to just let them talk and listen. And that's really where you'll be able to capture some of these insights. And of course, tapping into studies and research, I think that's, that's pretty straightforward, but especially as you're connecting with your consumers and continuing to build those relationships and let them know that you are still here, right? That's another thing. You as a business, you want to make sure that you're continuing to be present. When they're logging into their social media account, they see a post of yours or they see relevant content that they can utilize during this time. So really figuring out a way how you can continue to be relevant and of importance to them. continuing to build your online presence. Again, you can do that with social media and also with technology use. So if you've been hosting events in person, now that's kind of transitioned online. I know it's been quite a learning curve for many to understand how can we use Zoom, or any other platform to now host our event online and still be able to deliver that content and that value to our customer. Purpose and meaning is what really drives consumer decisions, and eventually that's what drives sales and loyalty. And so the more you can focus on your purpose during this time and connect that with your content and your messaging that you're putting out to your consumers, the better it is for your business. Again, this is time during crisis where customers or brands and businesses tend to go back and really understand what their values and their pillars look like and how they can connect that with their marketing output. And it's an opportunity to go back and reassess your purpose if need be, to make sure that that aligns with your products and services. Of course, last, we also just talked about revisiting your strategy to determine new opportunities for service offerings, product offerings. That is really important because it allows you to be innovative as a brand. And that's something that during a time like this, you definitely want to make sure that you're innovative, that you're relevant, that you're able to kind of pivot during this time, right? And so I mentioned the example earlier with the automotive industry, where they're able to now produce hand sanitizers and just kind of help in that PPE space, which has been a great community effort, but also for them very innovative as a business and a sign of agility. Last but not least, reassessing your diversity values and how this can be further emphasized in the strategy and also in the implementation. So again, going back to understand, are we a diverse company? If so, how? What are we doing? How is that reflected through our messaging, our content, through the way we just exist as a company? Where are we looking to go? So we're here and we want to get here, and maybe this is a time that has opened your eyes to understanding how you can fit into this or how you want to fit into this, and figuring out the action items, the actionable steps that need to take place in order for you to get from point A to point B. And so I hope that this was a valuable session for you today, that you were able to take some key information away from this, whether it's, for your own business or for a company that you work with, that you're really able to go back and implement some of those ideas.
Well, before we wrap up, we have an 11 o'clock hard stop. I do want to make sure there's a quick question on interactions. So quickly, what are some of the things you have done to create interactions or comments on your posts to increase that engagement?
So I think it goes back to being relevant. For us, I think it was a very natural progression to be able to push out more content in this space, because our focus is authenticity, culture, and diversity. And we focus on multiculturalism. And right now, I think a lot of multicultural groups are experiencing different challenges and different issues that we were able to address. So whether that was doing one-on-one sessions with them and offering free consulting sessions that we were promoting online, and that got a lot of engagement. So really tapping into our email base, but also into our following online. I think another thing was just pushing out content and releasing that through local and national media outlets. So, whether that was writing an article, kind of pushing our thought leadership in the space a little bit more, but also at the same time helping our community with providing marketing tips during COVID, or one of our articles that we pushed out through the Women's Business National Enterprise Council, which is very, national, that they certify all of the women-owned businesses. And so connecting with other organizations in that space, sharing our expertise, our thought leadership, and then getting a lot of engagement by doing that, because we understand what small businesses are looking for, what advice they currently need. And so we really were able to tap into that and engage them that way.
Well, Lydia Michael, I want to thank you very much for your time and sharing some good information, excellent information. Outstanding job. Lydia Michael is here, contact information, president owner of Glenda Collective. And we really do appreciate it. Like I said, this will go viral this afternoon. This will be posted on Detroit Public Television's YouTube channel, or DPTV, the YouTube channel this afternoon. Before we break, I want to turn it back over to Lance because I will accept responsibility. I didn't get a chance to record the very first couple of minutes of the session, so I want to make sure I give Lance a chance to, from Comcast. I want to give Lance a chance to make his comments again from Comcast so we can have him on record. He can share with his team. Lance, all yours.
Thanks, Mark, and great presentation there, Lydia. I think that information was very helpful and obviously relevant in this time too. So, but yeah, Comcast Business, we've done a lot of things to really separate ourselves from any competitors. You know, the brand obviously speaks for itself as fast, reliable, high speed, all that, but a lot of people don't see the things that we do that separates ourselves. You know, we have products and services that no other service provider can or does offer at this point. Our pricing is actually had been impacted by COVID in a way to where we want to help businesses start back up. So if you have a package with us, if you're moving, or if you're thinking about starting up a new business in this time frame, you know, now's really the time to look at your package or shop with us. So that's another good thing I wanted to bring up. And then we have networking opportunities for the other professionals in there. You know, one of the networking things I do is I partner with IT people, commercial realtors all the time. Just getting your foot in the door with Comcast that way is another good way to team up with us. And the networking opportunities are great too. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to jump on this call, is there's just so much more than internet with us. You know, it's a big slew of things that we can do. And I really just thank you for the exposure you guys have given me today on the Zoom call. I think this was a really productive call and got a lot of good information out of it. And I hope to connect with you guys here down the line in the future a little bit more too.
Right. Well, Lance, we thank you for Comcast Business Support. They've been with us since day one as well. And I can vouch for what he says. I have all my services with Comcast Business. They do a great job. And what I want to do is, as I wrap up, I do want to thank all of our sponsors. I want to thank Fifth Third Bank as a presenting sponsor, the Detroit Development Fund, again, Comcast Business. We've had many partners throughout this series. Again, over 450 people have been engaged, which has been phenomenal through social media. Through DPTV, through registrations, through these sessions. So the numbers, almost 450. Partners include Michigan Women Forward, Tanner Friedman, a strategic communications organization, America's SBDC, Michigan. Cindy Fletcher, State Farm agent out of Plymouth, Michigan. Our media sponsor has been Detroit Public Television as well. And I want to say in closing, you know, again, as we started the series 6 weeks ago, we had to pivot and we had to learn how to do things differently. And for myself personally, using technology has worked out to be a godsend in these particular times. So we try to build this system. We try to build this year's workshop building blocks. Normally we have a half-a-day session at Tech Town in May. And obviously during the pandemic here, we had to pivot and we decided to have an opening session. And then we had weekly sessions when we took a break for the 4th of July. We have weekly sessions throughout, ending today. So at this time, I just want to thank everyone for viewing, for those participating, all the emails and text messages that I have received. Again, we will be pushed this out virally as well. And I want you to go out and make it a great day, make it a great week. Make sure that you stay safe, you know, stay healthy. We're still in the midst of this pandemic, so do the right thing. And I really hope that this series of information has been very helpful for you. But stay safe, stay healthy. And I want to thank all of you for your participation. Thanks and have a great day. Take care.
Mark, for having me.
Thank you. Thanks for having us, Lydia. We appreciate it. Thank you so much. And Lance, thank you.